Toledo, in the year of our Lord 1500. The air within the Alcazar was thick with the scent of beeswax candles and the faint, metallic tang of old iron. Sunlight, filtered through the high, arched windows, cast long, dancing shadows across the polished stone floors, illuminating motes of dust that swirled like tiny, ephemeral spirits. Here, in the heart of a kingdom forged in fire and faith, a child was born. Joanna, the second child, the first daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella, the Catholic monarchs of Spain, drew her first breath in a world already steeped in the weight of dynastic succession. Her arrival was not a simple matter of joy, it was a crucial piece in the grand, intricate tapestry of European power. From her earliest days, the child was enveloped in a cradle of strict piety and relentless education. Her nursery was a miniature court, where lessons in theology and statecraft were as common as lullabies. She learned the cadence of prayers, the genealogies of royal houses, the subtle art of diplomacy whispered in hushed tones behind heavy tapestries. The scent of incense, perpetually burning in the royal chapels, clung to her velvet gowns, a constant reminder of the divine mandate that underpinned her parents' rule, and by extension, her own. She was a young girl, observant and intelligent, her eyes, dark and deep, absorbing the lessons of power, faith, and the unyielding burden of duty. Yet, beneath the veneer of royal composure, there was a nascent spirit, a private world yet to be fully understood, a quiet curiosity that flickered in the shadowed corners of her young mind. The very stones of the Alcazar seemed to hum with the constant thrum of political strategy, a low, persistent vibration beneath the surface of courtly life, a symphony of ambition played out in hushed conversations and carefully worded missives. The journey to Flanders in 1503 was a passage from one world to another. The crisp, cool air of the Low Countries, so different from the dry heat of Spain, filled her lungs as she stepped onto foreign soil. The Burgundian courts, with their own rich traditions and opulent displays, welcomed her, and with them came Philip. The union, so carefully orchestrated by their families, was, to the astonishment of many, ignited by genuine affection and a potent, intoxicating passion. It was a stark contrast to the cold, contractual marriages that were the norm for royalty. Here, in this new land, Joanna experienced a degree of freedom, a different rhythm of courtly life, a vibrant tapestry woven with threads of art, music, and a more relaxed, if still formal, social order. The scent of new beginnings, heady and intoxicating, filled the air, mingling with the undeniable perfume of burgeoning romance. She was a young bride, swept up in the thrill of love, a sensation so potent it momentarily eclipsed the suffocating pressures of her upbringing. Her spirit, long schooled in restraint, felt the exhilarating lightness of independence, her heart alight with a hope she had never dared to entertain. The grandeur of the Burgundian castles, their stone walls echoing with laughter and music, offered a stark contrast to the more austere piety of her Spanish home. The year 1504 brought with it the earth-shattering, life-altering event of childbirth. Joanna gave birth to her first child, a son, Charles, a precious heir who would secure the succession for her lineage. The nursery, once a place of lessons and duty, was now filled with the soft scent of clean linen and infant powder, a sanctuary of new life. This momentous event solidified her importance as a mother of future rulers, a crucial role in the dynastic chain. Yet, with this profound joy came an intensification of political scrutiny. Her life, and the health of her marriage, were now under a microscope, every glance, every whispered word dissected for its political implication. The hushed urgency of childbirth gave way to the quiet weight of expectation that settled upon the new mother. She was a woman navigating the complex terrain of motherhood, torn between the primal joys of nurturing her infant son and the crushing responsibility of producing heirs for a vast empire. Her emotional landscape, once relatively contained, began to fragment, her inner world becoming a more intricate, and at times, turbulent place. The scent of new life, so pure and hopeful, was now tinged with the subtle aroma of political consequence. Then came 1506, a year that would irrevocably alter the course of Joanna's life. Queen Isabella I of Castile, her mother, a monarch of immense strength and unwavering faith, died. According to Isabella's will, the throne of Castile was to pass to Joanna, But the reins of power, for the moment, were not to be placed directly into Joanna's hands. Ferdinand II, her father, a man whose political acumen was as legendary as his ambition, was appointed regent. This decision, seemingly a temporary measure to ensure stability, was the first deliberate step in the erosion of Joanna's autonomy, the beginning of the end of her freedom. The somber stillness of grief descended upon the court, a heavy shroud that carried the scent of wilting flowers and the somber aroma of beeswax candles, forever associated with mourning. Yet, beneath this palpable sorrow, chilling winds of political maneuverings began to swirl, eddying around the grieving queen. Joanna, already grappling with the profound loss of her mother, felt the immense weight of a crown being pressed upon her head, a crown she was not yet allowed to truly wear. Her mental fortitude, tested by grief, began to waver under the relentless onslaught of political pressure and the dawning realization that her own agency was being systematically curtailed. The scent of incense, once a symbol of divine mandate, now seemed to carry the fainter, more sinister aroma of manipulation and control. The world she had known was shifting, and the foundations of her sanity, already strained, began to crack. The air in Castile had grown thick with unspoken resentments, a miasma of ambition and distrust that clung to the ancient stones of the royal palaces. Ferdinand, the seasoned king, a man whose very presence seemed to exude the scent of old parchment and calculated strategy, moved through his regency with a practiced hand. But beneath the veneer of legitimate authority, a subtle war was brewing. He viewed his son-in-law, Philip, not as a partner in governance, but as an ambitious interloper, a gilded bird of prey whose foreignness grated against the ingrained traditions of Castile. Joanna, his daughter, a fragile vessel caught in the tempest of dynastic politics, was a pawn he intended to control. Ferdinand's gaze, sharp and assessing, often settled on Philip with a mixture of disdain and cautious calculation. He saw the younger man's impetuousness, his restless energy, and he recognized the dangerous allure of Castile for a man who craved dominion. The whispers of discontent among the Castilian nobles, those who chafed under Ferdinand's firm hand, were like a siren song to Philip, promising a crown and the intoxicating taste of absolute power. Philip the Handsome, as he was known, a man whose charm was as potent as his lineage, felt the pull of Castile like a physical ache. He was accustomed to the opulence of the Burgundian court, a place of silks and velvets, where intrigue was woven into the very fabric of daily life. Yet, the thought of ruling Castile, of adding its rich crown to his already considerable inheritance, was a prize that overshadowed all else. His aunt, Margaret of Austria, a woman of shrewd political acumen, watched him with a mixture of pride and apprehension, aware of the volatile currents he was inviting into his life. The Castilian delegation that had arrived in Flanders, their faces etched with a mixture of deference and subtle defiance, fed his ambition. They spoke of Ferdinand's perceived slights, of his foreign advisors, of the need for a true Castilian king, and Philip, with his inherent sense of entitlement and his burgeoning desire for a kingdom to call his own, listened with an ever-increasing fervor. He saw not just a throne, but a destiny, a chance to forge a legacy that would eclipse even that of his formidable father-in-law. The scent of ambition was intoxicating, a heady perfume that masked the dangers lurking in the shadows. Joanna, meanwhile, found herself adrift in a sea of conflicting loyalties and rising anxieties. The initial passion that had bound her to Philip had begun to cool, replaced by a growing unease. She saw the way he looked at the Castilian nobles, the way his eyes gleamed when they spoke of power, and a cold dread began to creep into her heart. Was his love for her merely a stepping stone to his greater ambitions? The whispers that reached her ears, tales of Philip's dalliances and his clandestine meetings, were like poisoned darts, piercing her already fragile emotional state. Her father, too, cast a long shadow. His pronouncements, his subtle manipulations, his constant assertion of his own authority, left her feeling increasingly marginalized, a queen in name only. The stifling confines of the Flemish court, once a symbol of her newfound freedom, now felt like a gilded cage. The scent of perfumed lies and veiled threats hung heavy in the air, and in the quiet solitude of her chambers, paranoia began to take root. She found herself scrutinizing every glance, every hushed conversation, her perception of reality becoming increasingly distorted. The weight of her mother's death, the immense pressure of succession, and the growing suspicion that she was being systematically undermined by both her father and her husband, began to fracture her already strained mental fortitude. She felt a profound sense of betrayal, a gnawing loneliness that threatened to consume her. Ferdinand, ever the pragmatist, recognized the shifting tides. His position in Castile, while secured by Isabella's will, was not unassailable, especially with Philip's growing influence and the support of a significant faction of Castilian nobility. His departure for Naples, a strategic move to consolidate his own interests in the Mediterranean, was a calculated risk. He believed he had left enough levers of power in place, enough loyal advisors, to maintain his influence, to continue to pull the strings of Castilian politics even from afar. As his fleet sailed south, the scent of salt spray and the vast expanse of the sea seemed to mirror his own ambitions. He envisioned a scenario where Philip, exposed and unsupported by his father-in-law, would falter, leaving the door open for Ferdinand's eventual return and a complete reassertion of his control. He saw Philip's ambition as a predictable, almost naive, trait that could be exploited. He was confident in his ability to orchestrate events, to play the long game. But Philip, sensing the shift in the wind, saw Ferdinand's departure not as a temporary lull, but as an opportune moment. With Ferdinand's watchful eye no longer upon him, and with the backing of influential Castilian nobles eager to replace the Aragonese regent, he saw his chance to seize the reins of power. He gathered his forces, his mind alight with the prospect of immediate dominion. The journey back to Castile was a triumphal march, each town that pledged allegiance a stepping stone closer to his ultimate goal. The Castilian nobles who had championed his cause, men like Alonso de Fonseca and Diego López de Pacheco, the Duke of Escalona, rallied to his side, their own resentments finding a powerful focal point in the ambitious Archduke. When he finally entered Castile, the air crackled with anticipation. The cheers of the crowds in some cities were a heady balm to his ambition, while the hushed silences in others spoke of the deep divisions that Ferdinand's rule had sown. He was proclaimed king, a title that felt both earned and inevitable. Joanna, a pale figure beside him, her eyes vacant, her spirit increasingly withdrawn, was a mere specter in the unfolding drama. Philip, exultant, reveled in his triumph, the scent of victory intoxicating. But for Joanna, witnessing the usurpation of her birthright, the ascent of a husband who seemed to view her as little more than a vessel for his own ambition, the descent into despair deepened. Her sense of agency, already fragile, began to crumble entirely. The weight of the crown, which she had never truly worn, now felt like an unbearable burden, crushing her spirit under its invisible force. The court in Castile, now under Philip's direct rule, was a place of strained silences and palpable tension. Philip, energized by his newfound authority, ruled with a decisive, almost arrogant, hand. He was eager to implement his own policies, to reshape the kingdom in his image, and in his haste, he often dismissed Joanna's presence, her counsel, her very being. The fragile threads of their marriage, already strained by suspicion and political maneuvering, began to snap. Joanna's emotional and psychological distress, a storm that had been gathering for years, now raged with terrifying intensity. The grief for her mother, a wound that had never truly healed, festered. Her suspicions about Philip's fidelity, amplified by the constant whispers of courtiers and the stark reality of his dismissive attitude, curdled into a deep-seated paranoia. The relentless pressure of political intrigue, the constant awareness of her diminishing role, the gnawing loneliness that permeated her days, all these elements coalesced into a maelstrom of torment. Her behavior, already erratic, became increasingly unpredictable. She would alternate between periods of melancholic withdrawal, where she would sit for hours, staring blankly into space, and outbursts of intense emotion, weeping uncontrollably or railing against perceived injustices. The scent of fear began to permeate the palace, not just from those who opposed Philip, but from those who witnessed Joanna's unraveling, unsure of how to react, how to interpret the behavior of their queen. She was becoming a figure of pity and apprehension, her once sharp intellect clouded by a storm of sorrow and suspicion. The very air around her seemed to hum with an unseen affliction. Then, as suddenly and brutally as a lightning strike, the tempest that had been brewing for years broke with devastating force. In the bustling city of Burgos, amidst the cacophony of courtly life, Philip the Handsome, the King of Castile, the man who had so ruthlessly pursued his own ambitions, was struck down by a sudden illness. The news rippled through the palace like a shockwave, silencing laughter, freezing conversations, and plunging the court into a stunned, disbelieving silence. The scent of mortality, sharp and undeniable, filled the air, mingling with the cloying sweetness of funeral flowers that would soon arrive. Philip, so full of life and ambition just days before, was gone. His death was a cataclysm, a sudden, violent tremor that shattered the foundations of the political landscape. The succession of Castile, so recently secured by Philip's forceful hand, was plunged into immediate uncertainty. A power vacuum yawned, vast and terrifying, and the vultures of ambition, who had been circling for so long, now began to descend with renewed ferocity. For Joanna, despite the complex and often painful nature of her marriage, the shock was profound. The man who had been both her tormentor and the object of her desperate, fractured love was dead. Her already fragile mental state, battered by years of grief and suspicion, was further shattered. She was plunged into a disorienting abyss of grief, her world collapsing around her with the sudden finality of a tomb sealing shut. The emotional turmoil was immense, a chaotic symphony of sorrow, confusion, and a terrifying sense of being utterly alone. Into this void of uncertainty stepped Ferdinand II of Aragon, the ever-watchful father, the astute politician. He had been in Naples, consolidating his own power, but the news of Philip's death was a summons he could not ignore. He saw, with the cold clarity of experience, the opportunity that had been presented to him. The fragile kingdom, now without a strong male ruler and with its queen deemed by many to be incapable of governing, was ripe for the taking. He returned to Castile not as a grieving father-in-law, but as a king reclaiming his rightful influence. His journey back was marked by a calculated calm, a deliberate pace that allowed him to gauge the political currents, to rally his loyalists, and to prepare his narrative. He arrived in Castile, the scent of Aragonese authority a familiar, yet now more potent, presence. He moved swiftly, his actions imbued with a sense of urgency, but masked by an outward display of concern for the stability of the kingdom and the well-being of his daughter. He began to subtly, and then not so subtly, reassert his authority, leveraging Joanna's perceived instability. The narrative of her madness, which had begun to circulate during Philip's reign, was now amplified, weaponized. It was no longer a whisper of concern, but a resounding declaration, a tool to justify his own reconsolidation of power and to ensure that Joanna's claims, her very right to rule, would remain dormant. His focus was entirely on strategic advantage, on securing his legacy and the future of his dynasty, and Joanna's incapacitated state was a convenient, if tragic, means to that end. The accusations of madness, once a hushed concern, now echoed through the corridors of power like a death knell for Joanna's autonomy. Ferdinand, with the tacit or explicit support of key figures such as Cardinal Cisneros, a man whose piety was matched only by his political astuteness, and Bishop Juan de Ribera, a staunchly religious advisor, systematically constructed a case for Joanna's unfitness to rule. The chroniclers, the scribes, the very fabric of official documentation began to weave a tapestry of her alleged insanity. Her grief, her bouts of melancholic despair, her moments of paranoia, all were meticulously recorded and interpreted through the lens of madness. Her deep and abiding love for her deceased husband, Philip, even after his betrayals, was twisted into evidence of an unhealthy obsession. Her withdrawal from courtly life was painted as further proof of her detachment from reality. This carefully constructed narrative served a singular purpose: to legitimize the confinement of the Queen of Castile and to consolidate power in the hands of Ferdinand and, by extension, her young son, Charles. Joanna, increasingly bewildered and distressed, found herself the subject of intense scrutiny, her every action dissected, her every tear interpreted as a symptom of her supposed affliction. The weight of this condemnation, the sheer injustice of her situation, was a crushing burden, her grief and emotional struggles weaponized against her very personhood. The scent of judgment hung heavy in the air, a chilling precursor to her impending imprisonment. And so, the order was given. Ferdinand, his decision made, his path cleared, decreed that Joanna should be moved. The destination was Tordesillas, a town in the province of Valladolid, a place that would soon become synonymous with her long and agonizing confinement. The journey itself was a somber procession, a slow, mournful procession across the Castilian landscape. The scent of dust and the oppressive stillness of the open road seemed to mirror the dawning realization in Joanna's heart. This was not a temporary relocation, not a brief respite, but the beginning of an indefinite imprisonment. Her hope for freedom, which had flickered even in the darkest of times, was now extinguished. The world outside her carriage, the familiar hills and fields of Castile, seemed to recede with each passing mile, replaced by the looming prospect of a life suspended, of a queen stripped of her crown, her dignity, and her liberty. She was to be placed under strict guard, her access to the outside world, to news, to letters, to any semblance of normal human contact, severely limited. The court at Tordesillas, which had once been a place of royal residence, was to become her gilded cage, a monument to her lost power and her enduring suffering. The psychological toll was immense. Resignation settled upon her, a heavy cloak woven from threads of profound loss and despair. The light in her eyes seemed to dim, her spirit bowed under the weight of her fate. She was a queen, yes, but a queen whose reign would be defined not by her decrees, but by the walls that would soon enclose her. The air in the royal palace of Valladolid had grown thick with unspoken resentments and the cloying scent of fear. Philip, her husband, her handsome prince, now king consort of Castile, ruled with a heavy hand, his ambition a palpable force that seemed to suffocate the very air Joanna breathed. He moved through the court like a phantom king, his presence a constant, chilling reminder of her own diminishing influence. His pronouncements, his decrees, his very gaze seemed to dismiss her, to render her invisible. She was meant to be his queen, his partner, yet she found herself increasingly adrift, a ghost in her own court. The weight of her mother's death, a wound that refused to heal, lay heavy upon her. Isabella, the formidable queen, the woman who had shaped Joanna's world, was gone, leaving a void that no amount of royal ceremony or political maneuvering could fill. Grief was a constant companion, a dark shroud that clung to her, amplifying her suspicions, twisting her perceptions. Philip's absences, his late nights, the hushed conversations that ceased when she entered a room, these were the threads that wove the fabric of her growing paranoia. Was he truly faithful, or was he merely another player in the grand, treacherous game, using her, discarding her, as the political winds shifted? The constant pressure, the relentless scrutiny of her every word, her every gesture, began to chip away at her resolve, at the very foundations of her sanity. Her mind, once sharp and observant, now felt like a fractured mirror, reflecting distorted images, fragmented thoughts. Tears came easily, often without reason, a torrent of sorrow that left her weak and trembling. She would retreat to her chambers, the heavy tapestries muffling the sounds of the court, seeking solace in the silence, only to find it filled with the echoes of her own tormented thoughts. The scent of lavender and beeswax, once comforting, now seemed to suffocate her, trapped within the suffocating confines of her own despair. She began to speak to herself, her words a low murmur, a desperate attempt to make sense of the chaos that swirled around her. Her ladies-in-waiting, once her confidants, now watched her with a mixture of pity and fear, their whispers carrying the seeds of what would soon be her undoing: the accusation of madness. Then, as suddenly as a thunderclap on a clear day, the world shifted. The vibrant, restless energy that had defined Philip's reign was abruptly extinguished. News arrived in Valladolid, carried on the wind like a harbinger of doom. Philip the Handsome was dead. He had been in Burgos, struck down by a sudden, inexplicable illness, his life extinguished in its prime. The shock rippled through the court, a wave of stunned disbelief. The opulent halls, usually alive with the scent of expensive perfumes and the rustle of silk, were now filled with a palpable stillness, a chilling silence that spoke of mortality and the terrifying fragility of power. Philip, the object of so much ambition, so much contention, was gone. His death left a void, a gaping chasm in the heart of Castile, and in the already fractured heart of Joanna. The political landscape, so carefully constructed by Ferdinand and Philip, was thrown into disarray. The carefully balanced scales of power tipped precariously, and the scramble for influence began anew. For Joanna, the news was a devastating blow. Despite the betrayals, the suspicions, the isolation, he had been her husband, the father of her children, the man with whom she had once shared a passionate, if fleeting, love. His death plunged her into a profound and disorienting grief, a grief that tore through the tattered remnants of her emotional stability. The carefully constructed walls she had built around her heart crumbled, and the full force of her despair washed over her, threatening to drown her completely. She wept uncontrollably, her body racked with sobs, the scent of her own tears a bitter testament to her loss. Her mind, already teetering on the brink, was further shattered by this unexpected, catastrophic event. The world she knew had dissolved, leaving her adrift in an ocean of sorrow and uncertainty. Ferdinand II of Aragon, the shrewd and ever-watchful king, saw his opportunity with the clarity of a hawk spotting its prey. News of Philip's death reached him like a divine summons, a call to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his, and what he believed he could manage far better than his unstable daughter. He had been in Naples, consolidating his own interests, but the moment Castile was left without a clear, strong leader, he set sail for home. His return was not one of triumphant fanfare, but of calculated precision. He moved through the political landscape with a quiet authority, his presence a familiar, yet imposing, force. He found a court in disarray, a kingdom ripe for his reassertion of control. Joanna, he knew, was incapable. Her grief, her perceived instability, these were not weaknesses to be pitied, but tools to be wielded. He spoke of her condition with grave concern, his words carefully chosen to paint a picture of a queen utterly unfit to rule. He spoke of the need for stability, for strong leadership, for a hand that could guide Castile through these turbulent times. His own hand, of course. He invoked Isabella's will, her desire for Joanna's succession, but subtly twisted it to serve his own agenda. He was the rightful regent, the one who understood the intricacies of power, the one who could protect the realm from itself, and from the lingering threat of foreign influence, the very influence Philip had courted. The scent of Aragonese authority, once a distant memory, now permeated the air, a subtle but undeniable shift in power. Ferdinand, pragmatic and resolute, saw Joanna's incapacitation not as a tragedy, but as a political necessity. Her illness, her emotional turmoil, were merely the justifications he needed to secure his own power and, he told himself, the future of his dynasty. His focus was entirely on strategic advantage, on ensuring that the crown of Castile remained firmly within his grasp, and that his grandson, the young Charles, would one day inherit a stable and unified kingdom. The whispers began subtly, like the rustle of dry leaves on a cold autumn wind. First, it was among the courtiers, then the clergy, and finally, it echoed in the hushed pronouncements of Ferdinand himself. Joanna, the Queen of Castile, was not merely grieving, not merely distressed. She was mad. The narrative was carefully constructed, meticulously woven from threads of her erratic behavior, her profound sorrow, her increasingly withdrawn nature. Her moments of lucidity were dismissed as brief respites, her periods of deep despair as evidence of her utter unfitness to rule. The accusations were insidious, designed to strip her of her authority, her dignity, her very identity as a monarch. Bishop Juan de Ribera, a staunchly religious figure, spoke of her perceived spiritual unraveling, while Alonso de Fonseca, Archbishop of Santiago, and Diego López de Pacheco, Duke of Escalona, the prominent Castilian nobles who had once supported Philip, now found it politically expedient to concur with Ferdinand's assessment. They spoke of her inability to comprehend state matters, her susceptibility to influence, her dangerous emotional volatility. The weight of their collective judgment was immense, a crushing force that pressed down on Joanna, leaving her bewildered and distressed. Her grief, her very human struggle with loss and betrayal, was weaponized against her, transformed into the damning evidence of her supposed insanity. She found herself the subject of intense scrutiny, her every action dissected, her every tear interpreted as a symptom of her derangement. The chilling reality was dawning upon her: her own family, her own court, were systematically working to strip her of her birthright, to confine her, to erase her from the annals of power. The order came not with a roar, but with a quiet finality that was far more terrifying. Ferdinand decreed that Joanna was to be moved, not to a place of healing, not to a place of comfort, but to Tordesillas, a small, provincial town in Valladolid. The procession was somber, a dark ribbon of horsemen and carriages winding its way through the dusty Castilian countryside. The air was thick with the scent of dust and the unspoken finality of her fate. Joanna, her face pale and drawn, her eyes vacant, sat within the confines of her carriage, a prisoner in her own kingdom. There was no resistance, no outburst, only a profound, heart-wrenching resignation. The dawning realization of her permanent imprisonment settled upon her like a shroud. Tordesillas. The name would become synonymous with her long exile, her years of suffering. The journey was not just a physical displacement, it was a psychological descent, a final farewell to any lingering hope of freedom, of reclaiming her throne, of living a life beyond the confines of her grief and the machinations of men. The doors of Tordesillas, she knew, would close behind her, and the world outside would cease to exist, leaving her to face the long, silent years of her captivity. The royal palace of Tordesillas, once a residence of royalty, now transformed into a gilded cage, became Joanna's world. Its silent, echoing halls seemed to absorb the light, leaving only an oppressive dimness. The scent of old stone and stagnant air filled her lungs, a constant reminder of her isolation. She was installed within its walls, a queen in name, but a prisoner in reality. Her life was dictated by the decrees of her father, and later, by the commands of her son. A small retinue of ladies in waiting, their faces etched with a mixture of pity and apprehension, attended her, their movements hushed, their words carefully chosen. Guards stood sentinel at every door, their presence a constant, chilling reminder of her confinement. The world outside continued its relentless march. Empires rose and fell, alliances shifted, wars were waged, but within the walls of Tordesillas, time seemed to stand still. Joanna, caught in a perpetual cycle of grief and resignation, oscillated between moments of fragile lucidity and long periods of profound mental anguish. She would sometimes speak of her mother, her voice filled with a sorrow that transcended years, or rail against the injustices that had befallen her, her words a desperate cry against the deafening silence. At other times, she would retreat into herself, her gaze fixed on some unseen point, lost in a world that only she could perceive. Her existence was a testament to her enduring suffering, a silent monument to a queen whose reign was defined not by her power, but by her imprisonment. The distant echoes of a burgeoning empire reached even the quiet confines of Tordesillas, a stark contrast to Joanna's stagnant existence. Her son, Charles, the child of her tumultuous marriage, had ascended to the throne of Spain, inheriting not only Castile and Aragon but also the vast, sprawling territories of the Habsburg Empire. He was now Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, a title that resonated with immense power and authority. Technically, Joanna remained co-ruler, her name a part of the official pronouncements, her lineage a crucial element in the legitimacy of his reign. But in practice, she was entirely excluded from governance, her rights and her title reduced to a mere formality, a historical footnote. The scent of new power, of vast territories stretching across continents, filled the air in the courts of Europe, a world away from the muted stillness of Tordesillas. For Joanna, aware of her son's meteoric rise, a complex tapestry of emotions unfurled. There was, perhaps, a flicker of maternal pride, a faint recognition of the legacy she had, however unwillingly, helped to forge. But this was overshadowed by the bitter realization that her own claims, her own birthright, remained unfulfilled, her agency perpetually denied. Her confinement was a constant, unwavering reminder of the power she had lost, the life she had been denied. The young emperor, preoccupied with the vast responsibilities of his global empire, saw his mother's continued existence as a political necessity, her confinement a convenient reality that eliminated any potential challenge to his authority. He would send emissaries, inquire about her health, but always with a detached politeness that underscored the chasm between them. The air in Tordesillas had long since settled into a permanent, dusty stillness, thick with the scent of old stone and the quiet resignation of a life suspended. For Joanna, the year had bled into another, marked not by seasons or celebrations, but by the subtle shifts in the guard's routines, the changing patterns of light and shadow across her cell-like chambers. The royal palace, a grand edifice in its own right, had become her gilded cage, its echoing halls a constant reminder of the freedom she had lost, the throne she had once been destined to inherit. She moved through these silent, sun-drenched rooms like a phantom, a queen in name only, her reign a distant memory, her present a landscape of profound isolation. The ladies-in-waiting, a small, carefully chosen cadre, moved with hushed footsteps, their faces a mixture of pity and practiced impassivity. They were her constant companions, yet they were also her keepers, their presence a perpetual testament to her imprisonment. Joanna's days were a tapestry woven with threads of lucidity and moments of profound mental anguish. One moment, she might recall the vibrant colors of her wedding gown, the scent of orange blossoms in Flanders, the warmth of Philip's hand in hers. The next, the shadows would lengthen, the whispers of her own mind would grow louder, and the grief for her mother, for her lost love, for her stolen crown, would engulf her entirely. Her existence was a testament to enduring suffering, a slow, quiet erosion of spirit under the relentless pressure of confinement. Then, a different kind of shift began to ripple through the kingdom, a tremor from afar that eventually reached the quiet walls of Tordesillas. News, carried on the wind and whispered through the corridors, spoke of Charles, her son. He was no longer the infant she had held, nor the boy she had glimpsed from a distance. He was a king now, ruling not just Castile, but the vast, sprawling empire of the Habsburgs, a dominion that stretched across continents. Joanna, technically, remained his co-ruler, her name still appearing on official documents, her title still etched into the annals of the Spanish monarchy. But in practice, she was a ghost, her presence a mere formality, a spectral figure whose shadow was carefully managed by her son and his advisors. The scent of new power, of vast territories and burgeoning influence, filled the air beyond her prison walls, a stark, almost cruel contrast to the stagnant atmosphere that defined her own life. She was aware of his ascendance, of the immense weight of the crowns he now bore. A complex tapestry of maternal pride and bitter realization colored her thoughts. Pride for the son she had borne, for the dynasty she had helped to secure. But beneath it lay the sharp, persistent ache of her own unfulfilled claims, the constant, gnawing reminder that her agency, her right to rule, had been systematically denied. Her confinement, once a consequence of her father's machinations, was now a convenient reality for her son's imperial ambitions, a necessary measure for the political stability of his colossal empire. The year of Ferdinand's death arrived, not with a fanfare, but with the quiet finality that marked the passing of an era. The scent of shifting power within the vast Habsburg Empire was palpable, a change in the very air that reached even into Joanna's secluded existence. Charles, now the undisputed ruler, his path cleared of the formidable shadow of his grandfather, was free to consolidate his power entirely. There was no longer any need for the pretense of shared authority. Joanna's confinement was no longer a matter of political necessity dictated by Ferdinand's strategic maneuvering. It was now a simple, unwavering decree from her own son. He saw her not as a mother, nor as a queen, but as a symbol, a historical footnote whose existence was best managed by keeping her safely out of sight, her claims to power forever dormant. The weight of years of confinement, however, remained a constant, an unchanging reality in this landscape of imperial ambition and dynastic consolidation. And then, at 75 years of age, after 46 years of confinement, Joanna of Castile died. The end came not with a dramatic flourish, but with the quiet stillness that had characterized her long imprisonment. The scent of finality hung in the air of Tordesillas, a release from suffering, a lifting of the oppressive weight that had bound her for so long. Her life, a tapestry woven with threads of royal ambition, personal tragedy, and a protracted, agonizing struggle for autonomy, had finally reached its conclusion. In those final moments, perhaps, a measure of peace settled upon her weary spirit. The earthly confines that had held her captive for so long, the mental and physical walls that had defined her existence, finally dissolved, allowing her spirit, at long last, to be free. History would forever grapple with the enigma of Joanna. Was she truly the Mad Queen, as the victors of her story would have it? Or was she a victim, a pawn sacrificed on the grand chessboard of European power, her profound grief and emotional turmoil weaponized by her father and her husband to justify her systematic disenfranchisement? The truth, as it often does, likely lay in a complex, nuanced space between these two extremes. She was a woman of intelligence, of passion, who had loved and lost with an intensity that perhaps the rigid structures of courtly life and the demands of dynastic succession could not comprehend. Her susceptibility to grief and jealousy, amplified by the constant political machinations and the perceived infidelities of her husband, were perhaps interpreted through a lens of misogyny and political expediency, her vulnerabilities exploited to strip her of her birthright. The whispers of accusation, the scent of judgment and manipulation that had swirled around her for decades, had finally faded with her passing. Yet, her story endured, a cautionary tale about the perilous intersection of power, gender, and mental health in history. The queen who ruled from prison, not through decree or edict, but through the sheer, tragic weight of her existence, her life a testament to the enduring consequences of ambition and the profound vulnerability of a spirit caught in the unforgiving currents of political destiny. The silent, echoing halls of Tordesillas would forever hold the memory of her long, solitary reign, a reign defined not by the lands she governed, but by the walls that confined her.